My kids are a lot smarter than I was at their age. A lot more boring, too, but as a parent, I suppose I'll take the trade-off. Maddie and Noelle work out nearly every day, they hardly ever drink, and they're keenly aware of how many grams of protein they're eating. In college, I was only keenly aware of how many cigarettes I had left. It's not just the kids today either. Obesity rates are declining in the United States for the first time in more than a generation. Yes, GLP-1s have something to do with it, but the trend started long before Ozempic and its friends came along. Americans are exercising smarter, drinking less, and generally being more mindful of how they treat their bodies and their brains. Nowhere is this trend more evident than in the explosive growth of the vitamin and supplement industry in the U.S. Sales in the category have more than doubled over the last decade, driven increasingly by younger consumers. Our smartest guy in the room today is Michael Costello, the chief executive officer of GNC, arguably the oldest and biggest name in nutrition retail. Michael took the reins in 2024 after more than 30 years at the Clorox company. He's applying the lessons and principles of CPG to turn GNC into a more consumer-obsessed business. Michael and I talked about how he's differentiating GNC in an increasingly Amazon-cluttered retail environment, how the company is leaning into science at a time when science skepticism is running rampant, and why personalization is good for their customers and their bottom line. We also talked about the best hangover cure, competitive eating, vintage cars, and a lot more. So grab a protein shake and listen to the healthy wisdom of Michael Costello and me, the dumbest guy in the room. Michael Costello, first question, asking for a friend. What supplements do you recommend for someone who's looking to either prevent or mitigate a severe hangover?
The best way to mitigate a severe hangover clearly is to don't drink or to stop early. As I tell my kids all the time, any drinking after midnight or any shots should be avoided because those are only to the detriment of your health. They're rarely as fun as you think they are.
Yeah.
You know, I actually do use Cheers, which is a brand out there that helps reduce some of the impacts, on your, some of the side effects, not of alcohol, but of the things that your body breaks it down into. Does it work? Does it not? I'm actually not quite sure. But I figure at the worst, I take something that I think helps. And so I feel a little bit better.
Great. Well, this podcast is chock full of insights, and there's a big one for our guests. Well, yeah. Seriously, thanks a lot for joining me today. Really excited about the conversation, even when we as we've gotten to know each other over the last couple months. When we first connected, it was on the heels of a paper we had recently published that focused on sort of the decline of obesity in the country over the last 6-7 years. And it was both things we see in our own data, but also recent reports from the CDC that had seen really for the first time in almost a generation, rates of overweightness in the US had been in decline. And what we found in our work was we looked for all the trends we could over that period of time that correlated with that decline. And some of the things you would expect weren't in fact correlated. Americans aren't exactly eating healthier. We're not sleeping better. We're not doing more cardio exercise. There were really two things, and we're careful here to ascribing causality to things, but the two things that we saw that were clearly correlated over that same time frame was one was the increase in strength and resistance training that Americans were doing as for exercise, and the second one was just the incredible increased growth in the use of vitamins and supplements. So start us off here. How does that kind of gel with what you've seen from your perch at GNC? You started there a little over a year ago, I guess, July or so of 2024.
Yeah, that was when I became permanent. I actually started as interim. I actually started interim in November 20. Okay. Tell you why with that later. But yeah, so I've been here 20 months now. And I would actually say it goes back further than that, right? Because I always talk about my story is that I started taking creatine in the 90s when creatine was sold in a kilo in a black bottle, and people thought it was steroids. To selling to GNC as a brand when I was working on some brands to now coming into GNC, and that whole trend I think has definitely been there. I think there's a few different trends that happen. You talk about strength training. Strength training has really gotten, moved out of the gym to be like, hey, you have to go to the gym, you have to lift lots of weights. Especially with women. Women don't always look at that and say that's, they're worried about their physique in different ways. Not everybody has the time to be in the gym all the time. It, doesn't feel as kind of energizing. What I will tell you is I think we've seen a big growth in strength training, and understanding strength training is really important for longevity, for weight management, for actually better sleep, which is, we're all after, and just overall better health. Cardio is great. I love cardio. I get my dopamines when I go run. It's fun for me, right? It feels like I'm being healthy, but I make sure my strength training is there 4 to 5 times a week. The other big thing I think what you're seeing is, guess what else is strength training? Yoga strength training. Pilates is strength training, right? Those are isometric exercises. A plank is strength training. So all of those things that you see, the yoga studios going up, the Pilates studios going up, is also part of different ways to get strength training. You don't have to go do squats in the gym. I love squats in the gym. It's one of my favorite exercises, but it's not everybody's. So I think that's kind of really expanded. The other big trend out there, which is I find really interesting, and it's, my kids' generation, that both millennials, not my kids, Gen Z, my kids, actually take supplements at the same level as boomers. And normally the old pattern on vitamins, minerals, and supplements was simple. When you're young, nothing can break you. You don't care. You're out there, right? You can go on 3 hours sleep, and that being, Gen X, that was kind of the way I remember the 20s and 30s. The newer generations are a little bit smarter than we were. And they're smarter in ways. They understand health. They use social media to understand some of the trends, what the data is behind there. Some of it's biohacking, but a lot of it's just they're having more access to information about what they should be taking. I think COVID increased that some, but this was even happening before COVID. And it was really the fact that folks are saying, hey, some of these things give me long-term benefit. One of the ones I love to tell everybody they should take is collagen. And collagen helps reduce hair, skin, and nails. It also helps reduce wrinkles. All right. I think I look younger because I put it in my coffee every day. I probably should have started when I was in my 20s. Right. The fact is, I didn't start until I was probably my late 40s. And that caused, so I'm, because the whole idea of aging, we can't stop aging. I don't want to stop aging. I like getting older every day. But you can bend the curve a little bit. Right. So that how does your body really react to it? How do you keep your muscle mass? How do you keep your skin? How do you keep everything just a little bit better than it would have been if you didn't supplement and didn't take those products? So I think the newer generations are, both seeing the benefits of strength training and not, limiting themselves just to bodybuilding, as well as really focusing on supplements as, the science has gotten so much better. They see the science. A lot of this is social media influence, and they're taking it.
Well, you mentioned two things that we see both in our data and also in my sort of focus group of my family, I guess, and my personal life. Is one, I'm a pretty avid gym goer. It's been remarkable over the last several years how much I've noticed the increase in the population of women in the gym. Right, that is much more, and also when I mentioned earlier the data we saw in sort of strength training and resistance training, that very much included the increase in use of like Pilates and yoga as exercise. The other one is my kids. My younger daughter's a probably bigger gym rat than I am, teaches me things about the gym that I've been going to the gym since I was, in high school, and has educated me on a few things, which is interesting. You're right. The future, I really do. The future, maybe not for them, is going to be rocky, right? Just because of the geopolitical and other things they're walking into and AI and all of that stuff. But I'm very bullish on this younger generation. They're super, super smart. My first question for you was about drinking. My kids have almost no interest in it whatsoever at that age, right? And so they're wise beyond their years.
It's wiser than we were at that age. Let's put it that way.
Okay, fair enough. Right. One thing I didn't mention in our sort of analysis on the kind of declining obesity rates was the prevalence of GLP-1s. And absolutely in the last couple years, that has very much contributed to declining obesity rates in the country. But the trend we saw started in 2017, 18, 19. I mean, GLP-1s weren't even, around or at least approved for weight loss purposes at that time. And we talk a lot with our customers across every industry you can think of, whether it's plus size apparel retail, alcohol is a big one getting hit by it, snacking, food portions at restaurants. Like every industry views it almost as this like massive, if not existential threat. You've leaned into GLP-1s as part of your strategy and almost embraced it as an opportunity more so than a threat. Can you talk a little bit about that? How you got to that place and sort of how it's manifesting itself in your strategy and in the business?
Yeah. So when we talk about GLP-1s, when we say we leaned into it, we didn't really lean into it in terms of selling it.
Right.
Right. Because, I look at that, our job as GNC is you're the main character. We're your coach. And so we want to help you on whatever journey you're on. GLP-1s for me are a fantastic invention. Now, like all fantastic inventions we have in the world, they have downsides. They have huge upsides and they have downsides. But the upsides are if you have become overweight for whatever reason, seriously, significantly overweight, whether it's disease, diabetes, a big contributor to some of that, which is what GLP-1s helped, or other reasons, your body's set at that. And so it's hard for, no matter how much work you do, especially as you get older, you really have a hard time taking that weight off. And we know taking that weight off will help with people who have prediabetes, not getting diabetes, with heart health, with joint health in terms of weight and everything else. So the fact that somebody can take a GLP-1 and reset their body to a different level that they could hope now maintain healthily is fantastic. The downside is GLP-1s come with lots of downsides. One of them is a lot of people can't stay on them because it slows down your GI tract. You feel more constipated. You feel more bloated. You feel other different reasons. You lose energy because you have a lot less calories. You're not getting enough of your vitamins and minerals and supplements and proteins because you're just not eating enough food overall. And so I looked at our store, I walked through GNC and I was like, every negative from a GLP-1, we have a product to solve. If you look at the clinical studies and it says, here's the percentage of people who have issues. And my point was, folks are looking, they're spending money. A lot of times they're cash money out to put themselves on GLP-1. They're trying to reset their health. That's fantastic. We should all be celebrating that. And now they're having all these other issues and we have products in the store that can help them. So to me, that was, hey, let's be clear. And we put a GLP-1 wall up, and we taught all of our coaches to really talk about the empathy about how people are on this journey and how can we help them, come in and stay on it for a while so they can hit their goal. And then hopefully as they come into GNC and they see, a lot of coaches encourage people to, are you walking? Are you doing different things? Can they make some other life adjustments that really keep themselves there? So that's why we leaned in. Our ethos in GNC is about living well, right? That's what we have at the bottom of our logo. I want folks who've maybe struggled with weight for a lot of their life to be able to live well and live a better life that they want, the life they want. Now, if you're okay with what your body is and where you are and everything else, right, you can still be in shape and not be fully trim. But those folks who are on GLP-1s are there for their personal goal, and we want to help them with their goal.
It's great. It's really smart. As everyone else seems to be kind of living in fear of the trend, you finding a way to complement it or ride it or whatever you want to call it, it feels super smart. So you took the reins at GNC after the better part of, well, exactly as you told me, 32 years at Clorox.
Yes.
Classic example of kind of quintessential CPG company. You stepped into a business with, I think it's fair to say, had a rocky few years in the years leading up to your time there, but also a much different type of business, right? You've got a retail footprint. You've got a much more kind of direct to consumer vis-a-vis e-com and the like, and in-store retail, say, than a CPG, which is generally, of course, through distribution and grocery stores and the like. You also have kind of a hybrid franchisee / corporate owned store model. So very different world than the one you came from. What was the biggest learning curve for you stepping into that business, coming from that world? That's part one of the question. So let's start there. Like, what parts of the challenge have kind of stimulated you the most stepping into a different type of company?
Well, stimulated, there's actually more than one question buried in there, right?
Okay.
Because my driver in my life is learning. That's actually what gets me up every day. And so when I came as interim on my choice because I'd been 32 years in CPG and actually was 3 years consulting with other small companies after that. A lot of startups who were all trying to get into retail. So now jumping to the other side of retail, I was like, wow, like, does my skill set transfer or not? Right. I think I'd be a little too full of myself if I said automatically that I could jump over. And there's been few other CPG people have jumped over and failed. So I want to go in, with eyes wide open. What I found was, some of the things that, I spent most of my career trying to work through retailers. So I was talking to them the whole time and understanding like how to get things done with them. And now I had the ability just to make things happen right away. And there's a good and a bad to that, right? Because sometimes you make things happen and they're actually not the right thing. Because the advantage of the retail organization that I found is that when we want to go execute something on a Thursday, we can actually have it in store by Saturday and moving forward on it. So how do you get that freedom to move a lot of things, but also still stay strategic and make sure you're really focusing on the consumer, which is for me the big transferable skill. Spent 35 years, basically 32 at Clorox, 3 after that, focusing on the consumer. I'm still focusing on the consumer. I'm just doing it through a different lens.
Well, that's a common problem we see with a lot of the retailers that we work with and that we study is that sort of lack of focus on the consumer. So much of it is about supply chain and assortment and footprint and logistical things, and the consumer or the guest or what have you is often an afterthought. Clearly a great transferable mindset to bring from a CPG company where those companies are very much consumer oriented. Were there any kind of leadership principles or other lessons you brought from Clorox to GNC?
Yeah, well, and what I would say is, John, is one of the great things when I got here is all those skills you just talked about, right? All those focus areas were already here, right? I already had supply chain, I already had merchandisers. The folks who were really good at those were already here. So it allowed me to kind of overlay my skill set on top of some already really good skills to really get folks to, I believe, to get to the next level. And what it was is, every transition I've ever done, I create a 180-day plan because I don't know enough in the first time period to what I'm going to go do. So I can I basically go out and interview everybody in the organization I can find all the good ideas and put them on a piece of paper and get people focused on the kind of easy wins. They're not always easy, but they're, if we go do these, we'll know we'll get some success. And I spent the next 180 days really working on a strategy. So how do I create a strategy? Where are we going to go? How are we going to get consumer focus? How are we going to how are we going to make GNC that special place for the consumer to come to? And then we rolled it out. And the CPG companies are really strategically focused because typically it is, you got to think about trends in the future. You got to think about what your innovation's coming up. So those skills is what I think I brought here, and that continual focus on the consumer. All of our conversations, I tell people that if you talk about the consumer first, you win.
Well, I also think it's probably fair to pass along some accolades to the folks whose decision it was to give you the reins there, that they saw, bringing somebody from outside of retail into that is a breath of fresh air. Really, really smart on their part.
The other thing is, when I first got here, I talked to some folks and I talked to some recruiters and said, what do you think about this? Like, what do you know about people who've come in these areas and failed? The only thing that made me feel positive was that one of the recruiters said, don't worry, nobody knows how to do retail today. So the
bar was low.
Like everything that was successful in retail in the past isn't working anymore. So everybody has to change. So you coming in with a new viewpoint is actually fairly positive because even if you've been in retail for 30 years, you have to change now because so many things have changed in there. So now I think that's not all the way true, right? Obviously, there's folks in retail who have been fantastic and have made all the transitions, but it does tell you retail has definitely had such a huge transition because from TikTok to Amazon to .com to DTC brands to malls. Some malls dying, some malls growing. I think shopping's changed significantly over the last 10 years.
Yeah, that's an understatement. Let's talk about a topic near and dear to our heart is as you mentioned, you diagnosed very quickly, probably even before you got there, but certainly quickly after you was that the company had sort of maybe lost its focus or didn't have enough of focus on the consumer. We always say here at Civic Science, we don't study things, we study people. And so that kind of ethos is really really resonates with us. Well, and the other part of that, I know a big part of your strategy is what we'll just loosely call personalization. So building that relationship with your customer beyond they're just going to come in and grab something off of a shelf, check out, and leave the store. Talk a bit about how you've shifted the focus to the consumer. What were some of the steps that you've taken? It's not just, you putting your money where your mouth is in accomplishing that goal. And then talk a bit about the personalization strategy and how that's manifesting.
I'm impatient, but I also know I have to be patient at the same time. In the fact, try and be a little bit of both. A lot of the big initial focus was on our coaches in the store. So in the first year, we shut down once a quarter to do additional training with coaches to talk to them about, how do you really go through this sales process, which is we're a consultative seller, right? When you come in the door, you typically have a reason to you have what you think is the product you want, or sometimes a reason of where you're coming in. An example I always use is, you come in for a protein. Protein's protein, right? And if you're walking to many stores, they'll say protein's on aisle 8. Coming to ours, our coach should ask you, well, what's your purpose? What are you using it for? Because there's people who want protein to lose weight. There's people who want to have protein because they're getting older and looking for longevity. There's folks who are trying to bulk up. There are folks who are just trying, maybe GLP-1, just trying to add more protein to their diet. Maybe you're going to take it at night. Those are all different proteins, and we carry all those different ones. Now, if you want to come in and just get the Chips Ahoy version with a really great tasting, that's fantastic. And I've been in store and talked to people that's great. What's your goal? Well, I'm trying to really bulk up. I'm trying to gain 20 pounds. Eat the Chips Ahoy if you want, but here's another one with BCAAs and leucine, which actually will help you gain weight faster and build more muscle mass. So having our coaches help educate and provide that education in store, to me, is one of the big things. So we can call it personalization, because it is. I'm finding out what is John's need, right? And then how do I get you the right products? And if you want to buy the Chips Ahoy, we'll gladly sell it to you. It's not a bad product. We carry it. Any product in our store is going to be a good product. But for you, there might be a better product for what you need. So we've done lots of training. We also put up, our coaches, they come in, they get training every week where they complete, and it's on product. It's on, some of the categories. It's a lot of trying to continually provide that education. And we provide training on the sales process, which is how to ask the right questions to really get at what you want. Because, I go to magnesium. There's magnesiums that are effective. They have somewhat bioavailability. They have some GI issues. They're okay. Some people don't have those. Other ones are really high end and cross the blood-brain barrier and have really high absorption. Some folks want the higher one. Some folks want the lower one. But I need to know what you want before I sell you what that is.
I want to talk a little bit about the products and the technology. And you mentioned innovation earlier. One of the things you've said publicly is that you don't want to be chasing fads. And there are a lot of fads and things that can pick up in popularity on social media, often with little to no scientific grounding whatsoever. I do want to talk about science also a little bit later. But how do you adjudicate? You see a lot of, kind of startup suppliers probably wanting to put things on your shelves and new inventions all the time. How do you adjudicate between something that's legitimate and something that's not, right? Or something that's just a fad? What are the standards you've set for deciding what's deserving of being on your shelves and what isn't?
So I have 17 masters and PhDs in nutrition and science. So I can cheat, and they help me with all that stuff. And they look at it, and they look at the studies that are out there. They look at what's there, right? There's things that are generally accepted as true, from experience in health. Like if I told you, is aspirin good for a headache? You'd say yes. Why do you know that? Because you've taken it and it's cured your headache before. There's other things that, if I give you a protein with leucine and BCAAs and I say it's going to build your muscles faster, well, I have a clinical research on that, and I can see that. So we're using kind of both of those. Do we get it right all the time? No, we don't. Meaning there's things that we miss because we looked at it and said, not quite so sure. But as folks went through it, it clearly helps out there. One of the things that's difficult on our categories is that there's two things that are very interesting. One is that, the human body's complex. So a lot of things that are in the fad cycle what you find out is that they help some people, but then it gets way overhyped. So, I'll take CBD as an example. CBD, I know, helps some people. There's some data out there that says it helps some people. It doesn't help everybody. And so all of a sudden, 70% of people are taking some huge amount because there's a fad, and people realize, hey, it didn't help me. It didn't help John. It didn't help Michael. Why am I spending this money on this thing? And it goes back down. And so partly, I think it's the brands being honest that not everything helps every person in terms of themselves, because our bodies are all different. So that's part of the fad cycle we have to be careful about, knowing that some of these products actually are helpful for certain people, but they're not the ones that we should be pushing to everybody walking in the door.
Well, that doesn't necessarily even make it a fad or illegitimate, right? It's just there's probably something about those people, maybe their chemistry or whatever else it might be, that and as we have larger and larger corpuses of science on these things, we might understand who it's going to work for and who it's not.
We eventually will, but what you'll see is that because it hypes and all of a sudden it goes on social media and everybody wants it, and all of a sudden you see these categories fall apart after a period of time, and they grow later because it finally kind of finds the right folks that it should be with. My point is on that fad, we don't want to be hyping that fad. We don't want to be talking about like it's good for everybody, because we know it's not, right? Melatonin, some people works really well for. Valerian root's better for others. Maybe you should be taking magnesium for your sleep. There's not unfortunately, there's not a single solution for a lot of these problems, because the problems are more complex than, hey, I'm not getting enough sleep. There can be multiple different factors for that.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is just the binary nature of our brains. We want to think things either work or they don't. And so we struggle with gray areas. And actually, so on that subject, it's a good segue. So you've got arguably the strongest brand in the country, if not the world, in this general space of nutrition, supplement retail. I can't think of another that's really even in the ballpark.
90 years helps with that.
Yes. But there are lots of alternatives out there if you search on Amazon and elsewhere for the lesser kind of informed consumer who's just looking for the quickest or the cheapest alternative. You've also got this problem growing in this country, which we've seen really kind of peak during the COVID epidemic and very much since, is a lot of like growing skepticism towards science. And so even when you say you're going to base your decision on what makes it on your shelves based on the evidence that your PhDs and scientists on your team bring to your table, a lot of consumers are out there just kind of ignoring that because they can always find sort of the antithesis science out there if they look hard enough. How to connect all of that back to that kind of understanding your consumer and that sort of personalization, how you sort of overcome that scientific, do you deal with that science? Do you see that scientific skepticism in your interactions with your consumers or in the broader market? And how are you positioning yourself relative to all of that, those other trends?
We've gone out and done a lot of focus groups with our core consumers and who we think our core consumers are. And so you have different groups, but you have the folks who have known the science. They read it. They read the back of the label, right? They know what's in there. I don't have to convince them of anything because they've already done all the research. There's a lot more folks like me who kind of know the science, who know it well enough to make some informed choices, but still need help. And that's our core growth consumer, which is we call the relentless achiever. And a relentless achiever is this person who's waking up every day, they're not in the gym 7 days a week. They're actually in the gym, a few days a week. They're also going on a run. They're walking the dog on the weekend with their kids. And they're seeing all that as working out. And they're coming in a lot of times to really help. They've read some things. Hey, magnesium is going to help me. What's my best one? They're looking for us to help them guide through it, but they're already knowledgeable. And when we've done the focus groups, it was interesting. The consumers told us, we know all the products on Amazon are not real. We know some of the products in mass are dumbed down versions of the ones you guys have, which are actually all true. And the fact that they knew that, we don't have to tell them. We just have to tell them we have the right products for them. My consumer knows the difference. My consumer is not a skeptic. My consumer actually really knows they're researching this stuff. They're looking at this stuff. So they're already predicated towards the fact of believing the science is out there.
Well, it was a bit of a loaded question because, as you know, we have data on a lot of these things, and we do track a large chunk of your customer base. And in fact, that is very true. The kind of correlation between being a GNC customer and being a science believer or not being a science skeptic is a very high correlation. So it's just a matter of your ability to find more of those people out there,
Yes.
right?
And they're out there. They're out there.
One last question about GNC, and then we'll get into some fun and trivial things to wrap up. So you're a little over a year into your full-time leadership of the business, a little longer that having been involved. Fast forward, I don't know what your horizon is, 3 years, 5 years, whatever, 10 years, and you reflect on your administration of the company. What do you want to accomplish? What would you look back on and say, yes, I did it. I was successful. How are you kind of measuring your outcomes there?
So I have my short question, the Bill Clinton thing, have your 30-second, your 5-minute, and your 30-minute. So I have all of those. So my kind of quick little soundbite is I can't wait till consumers are taking Instagram photos in front of GNCs. When that becomes something I want to post because I was in a GNC and I'm making this commitment, to me, that will be the definition. Now, if Instagram's gone and it's TikTok or whatever the next new thing is, but that folks are posting, because that prideful that I was at a GNC. That's my kind of short answer. My longer answer is really that the organization is consumer focused. We're known for delivering against those, that people understand the science and that they come to us to really help themselves on that health journey. And we're able to help people get better health outcomes because they've been able to talk to us.
A paper we are hoping to publish in the next couple weeks actually is some fairly, I guess in our nerdy world of consumer science, something of a bombshell discovery, which is the significant rise in real brand loyalty over the last 3 to 4 years. I used to give a stump speech kind of pre-COVID when I would travel, that brand loyalty was sort of a misnomer. People weren't really loyal to brands. They stuck with them for convenience or switching cost or what have you, but it wasn't really loyal in this kind of like visceral emotional sense. And what we've seen happen really over the last 3-4 years is the emergence of actual loyalty. And part of it, I think, is sad in that it's sort of like with declining levels of institutional trust all over the place and lack of faith in the media and politics and all these kinds of things, people are, and maybe even to some extent, some of the social withdrawal that people have experienced since the pandemic, that they're looking for those kinds of connections in other places, and they're forming them through, and it makes me feel old to say it, because it is happening predominantly among younger consumers, is they're forming these kind of like emotional connections with brands, right? And so whether we can judge whether that's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, the time is right for you to be able to accomplish that, because if you're consumer focused, personalization does create that emotional connection, right? Your coaches in your stores know their customer and they're helping them, and they can come back and say, "Oh my gosh, over the last 90 days, this advice you gave me has worked." And so you're in a unique position to capitalize on that.
It is. And, I think the other thing is you talk about brand loyalty being dead and it died. I think it definitely waned for a while. We go back and talk about the 60s and 70s when, that was where folks were and brands were core. But I think it's exactly what you said. It's this tribe mentality. It's like, I want to belong to something. And part of it is like that brand represents me, because brands don't live in corporate headquarters. Brands don't live with the marketers. Brands live in consumers' heads. And those brands live with consumer heads based on experiences they've had with that brand. And if the brand delivers on a consistent basis and the rest of the people you see yourself reflected in how the brand comes up, I think we all feel very positive about that. I have certain brands. I wear hookahs all the time. I wear certain things, and I will buy those brands. And other things, I'm going to buy whatever, because the brand hasn't resonated with me and doesn't connect with who I think I am.
Well, one thing that sort of the rise of e-commerce over the last 20 years did was it kind of allowed consumers to be more promiscuous about, right? Or they were just constantly searching for the lowest priced thing. And watching that kind of rebound over the last few years is really interesting. And when you talked about one of your sort of short-term goals is people snapping pictures of themselves and sharing it on social media, that's the other opportunity, is that when people start to, when brands start to become sort of a badge of people's identity, and we call them market mavens, right? They're not just the early adopters who try things first, but they love to tell their friends about it. And those people tend to have a tremendous amount of influence. When I can't trust whether I believe I can't trust science, or I believe I can't trust the government, or I believe I can't trust big corporations, I trust the people I know. And so that's a very virtuous goal for you. And also too, look, we just had Mark Cuban on last week's episode, and we talked about his drug company, and which is, having tremendous amount of success, even though he hasn't put a single penny behind any marketing in it. And obviously we need, drugs and medications need to be more available to people and more affordable for people. But the best thing we can do is keep them off the drugs, right? And that's a big role you have the potential to play.
Yeah, and I tell people all the time, right? We're not pharmaceuticals. We don't cure things. And and the magic of medicine is fantastic, right? We've had so much that from vaccines to different drugs that are out there. We talked about GLP-1s. They're fantastic medicines, and they really help people. But your best way is to never get on them.
Right.
And never need them, right?
Or to be able to manage them. Right.
We'll be able to manage them, right? So how can you help, because it's not all, like there's, a lot of things happen to folks. We all have had probably issues and health issues at times. How can I mitigate that through, staying healthy by taking the right supplements? As I tell you, some of it's vanity. I take collagen because I don't want to get wrinkles. That's true. But I take HMB because I want to reduce my muscle wasting and have more muscle mass as I get older. I take my multivitamin because guess what? Multivitamins have not proven, they don't not extend your life. When you get hit by the bus, you're going to get hit by the bus, unfortunately. But your health span increases, and the data shows 2 more years of health span, meaning there's 2 more years I get to be active and doing things I want. So when my kids finally have kids, someday I hope, not now, right? Not for a while, but when they do, I would love to be there and active with them. And, not be sitting watching the TV, but being out in the park with them. I think that's the goal most of us should have, is really trying, how do we enjoy life through being healthy versus I'm not being healthy to be healthy. I'm being healthy because I want to enjoy life as long as I can.
Well, one of the reasons you were such a big get for me on the podcast is because of how bullish I am on your business and the category you're in. When we look right now, even with so many headwinds blowing in the consumer's face, and we're seeing cutbacks and trade-offs and all manner of consumer spending, we track where people expect to spend more or less in the next 30, 90 days. And pretty much every category, from restaurant to apparel to technology devices, we see consumers saying that they anticipate spending less in those categories. There's only one, and I have a great chart, maybe we'll put it in the show notes, where consumers say they expect to spend more, is on wellness. And now that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people.
It can be your meditation app. It can be lots of places. But it comes back down to, like, it's trite, but it's true. Health is wealth.
Right. So you're in a great spot. Okay, Michael, I know you are a reader of my little Saturday missives that I publish, and we like to wrap.
And I forward them to lots of people too.
Oh, good. Well, they should just sign up so we know.
Well, I tell them to, but I can't make people do that.
Sure.
Right?
Well, why would they if they're getting it sent in their inbox? But I'm glad you do it. By all means, be a market maven for me. I appreciate it very much. But as you know, we always like to wrap up with a handful of fun poll questions so that listeners can get to know you a little bit better, and we'll see how America feels about these things. So I handpicked a few for you. Number 1, do you think competitive eating is a legitimate sport?
I would say no. I mean, it's interesting. It clearly you have to prepare for it, but I don't know if I'd consider it in the sport category. It's a competition. So I'll give them it's competitive. I just don't put sport next to it.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to have a counter opinion on that one, but I have to agree. And turns out 67% of Americans do pretty definitively agree with us on that one. Number 2, maybe a little bit of a deeper one. How would you feel about potentially moving back to the neighborhood where you grew up? Where did you grow up?
Well, that would be almost impossible because I grew up in Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, New York, and California.
Oh, you moved around quite a bit.
Yes.
Okay. So you don't associate one as your childhood hometown?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
Interestingly, 78% of people say that, and this is presuming they've moved away from their hometown. 78% of people say they don't and they wouldn't move back to their hometown, which I think is really interesting. I kind of live close enough to my hometown that I can go visit, but I don't know if I would ever move back there. Number 3, do you think it's important for students to learn cursive handwriting in school?
I do, but I think I failed as a parent on that because I don't think any of my kids really can. And where it's actually, I think it's important, like a lot of things, not because of learning cursive, because cursive really doesn't matter. I think where the stuff I've seen on it, it helps hand-eye coordination in terms of building that at that core time period when kids need to learn hand-eye coordination.
It's funny. Other than maybe signing my name, I only do it really once every year. It's kind of been a thing I've done for a long time here. Is I handwrite holiday cards to everyone in the company, and it's become increasingly onerous as the company's gotten a lot bigger.
Well, and can your younger employees read them?
I hope so. If not, then they have to go figure out how to. Then I'm teaching them to learn how to read it, I guess. But every year, so it takes me a couple of weeks to do them at this point because I have to do a lot of them. But every year, I have to kind of remind myself how to write a J or a G. Skills that I've lost. But 85% of Americans say that they do think it's important for students to learn cursive and handwriting in school. So now whether they will or not, we'll see. And I would imagine that's going to skew as an older group that believe that, right? Do you generally prefer the summer or winter Olympics?
Summer, for sure. And I think well, first of all, I've been to the Summer Olympics before. So I know how it feels to be there. I was at Atlanta. And the Winter Olympics, I enjoy, but I don't make as much I don't dedicate as much time towards watching it. As much as I love to ski and snowboard, I clearly can't do anything that they do on the mountains. So maybe I just don't resonate as close to it as I do some of the summer sports.
I agree. It's also the Summer Olympics has a huge advantage in terms of when it is conducted in terms of viewership. And it's just a little bit easier to carve out that time in the summer than it might be in whatever February. Interestingly, I was surprised by this one. It's pretty close. I mean, summer's the number one choice, but it's only about 3 percentage points higher than winter. So, well, you're in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, right?
Well, no, I say Pittsburgh because I'm here.
Well, okay. So yes, right. A bit of back and forth. I would imagine there's definitely some regional splits on those as well. Last but not least, this one was very much handpicked for you based on conversations we've had in the past. But do you usually prefer vintage or modern cars?
That's, as you know, the answer is already vintage.
Well, tell our audience why.
Actually, I'll tell you what's interesting. I don't know if you know this, is that I bought my first 65 Mustang when I was in my mid-20s. And I bought it because I really wanted to be an astronaut, was one of my dreams when I grew up. And I realized that was probably not going to happen. But my other dream was to actually have an old Mustang. And I realized I could make that dream come true. So I did. And I started learning how to work on cars based on that car. It eventually got stolen. But now I have way too many vintage cars. And I just I enjoy the art of them. To me, just it's an art piece as much as something that drives down the road.
Well, it's a very cool passion to have, and most of America agrees with you. It's not a runaway, but 56% prefer vintage over modern. So,
because I think a lot of people love the vintage cars, but they still want to have the new car in their driveway.
Well, they're easier to get your hands on at this point, though, too. But yeah. We don't really qualify the question about to own and drive, but maybe as to look at, I guess, maybe as the way people interpreted the question. So, well, Michael, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. I know you're super busy. You're solving, not only big business problems, but also big societal problems. And it was a kind of a coincidence to have, in fact, very much a coincidence to have you and Mark Cuban kind of back to back. It was just a sort of a nature of the scheduling, scheduling busy folks like yourselves kind of worked out that way, but you're both sort of tackling kind of healthcare broadly speaking from a different angle, but doing really good virtuous work at it. So wish you the best of luck. As I said, I'm super bullish on your business and your category, and I think your vision for it. So know that we're rooting for you, and maybe we'll have you back sometime and you can report on progress as the company continues to grow.
Love to. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for the time, Michael, and we'll stay in touch.
We sure will. Thank you, John.